Hello, my friends. Welcome back. I never quite expected that a snowed-in weekend with my grandson would end up becoming one of the most pivotal moments of my later years. I thought I had cleaned out the closets of my life long ago, dusting off the cobwebs and locking away the things that hurt too much to look at. But as it turns out, sometimes we don't need to lock the past away. We need to hand the key to someone who loves us enough to open the door without judgment. This is a memory of how a fresh pair of eyes helped me forgive a version of myself I had spent decades trying to forget. If stories about family, healing, and the quiet power of memory resonate with your spirit, please take a moment to gently tap that like button. It helps these stories find the people who need them most. I invite you to share your own journey in the comments below. I read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe so we can continue these reflections together. Before we settle in, I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from tonight? There is something so beautiful about the idea of us all gathered around this digital hearth, connected across oceans and time zones. Let me know your city or town. I'd love to welcome you properly. Now, let me take you back to a specific moment in time. I have alluded to this chapter of my life in passing before, usually with a self-deprecating laugh or a quick change of subject, treating it like a movie I walked out of halfway through. But it wasn't a movie. It was my life. It was the soil from which everything else grew, even if that soil was rocky and hard to till. The truth finally came to light during a fierce nor'easter in late January. I was 62 at the time. My grandson, Julian, had just turned 21. He was home on his winter break from the university, where he was studying architecture. Julian has always been an old soul. Even as a toddler, he didn't just look at things, he inspected them. He has a way of sitting in silence that doesn't feel empty, a rare quality in young men his age. He was staying with me at my old Victorian house on the coast while his parents were navigating a move across the country. The storm had hit us hard that afternoon. The sky had turned a bruised shade of purple and gray, and the wind was rattling the window panes in their frames, demanding to be let in. We were safe and warm inside, the house smelling of the rosemary sourdough bread I had baking in the oven and the wood smoke from the hearth. It was the kind of day that forces you to slow down, to look inward because the outside world has vanished behind a curtain of white. Julian was in the library, a room I rarely used anymore. It was filled with floor-to-ceiling shelves that held books I hadn't opened in years. I was in the kitchen, kneading dough, finding comfort in the repetitive motion, when he called out to me, "Gran, you might want to see this." His voice wasn't alarmed, but it held a specific weight that made me wipe the flour from my hands and walk down the hallway. When I entered the library, the only light came from the fireplace and a single brass reading lamp. Julian was sitting on the Persian rug, surrounded by a stack of old, leather-bound sketchbooks. He was holding one open, his eyes fixed on the charcoal drawing inside. I froze in the doorway. I knew exactly which book that was. I hadn't touched it since 1984. "Where did you find that?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. "It was behind the encyclopedias on the bottom shelf," he said, looking up at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of confusion and awe. "I didn't know you could draw like this. It's visceral, Gran." I walked over slowly, as if approaching a wild animal. The drawing he was looking at was a self-portrait, but not a flattering one. It was fractured, the lines sharp and jagged. The woman in the sketch looked trapped, her mouth open in a silent scream, her eyes wide with a terror that felt too big for the page. Beside her figure, in the shadows of the charcoal, was the looming silhouette of a man. "That's not art," I said softly, reaching out to close the book. "That's just venting. It's ugly." Julian gently moved the book out of my reach. "It's not ugly," he corrected. "It's honest. There's a difference." He paused, looking from the page to me. "Who is the man, Gran? And why does the woman look like she's disappearing?" I sank into the velvet armchair opposite him. The wind howled outside, a perfect accompaniment to the storm brewing in my chest. I looked at my grandson, this tall, confident, kind young man, and I realized I couldn't lie to him. The lie had been protecting me for 40 years, but it had also been isolating me. "I was your age," I began, my voice trembling slightly. just out of art school. I moved to the city with nothing but a portfolio and a head full of dreams. I met a man named Elias. The name tasted like ash in my mouth. I told Julian about Elias. He was a gallery owner, 15 years my senior, charismatic, brilliant, and utterly consuming. He told me I was a genius, but then he slowly began to edit me. He told me my brushstrokes were too aggressive, my subjects too sentimental, my voice too loud. I thought I was being mentored. I told Julian, staring into the fire. But I was being erased. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a reflection. He wanted a muse who wouldn't speak back. For 3 years, I stopped painting. I stopped seeing my friends. I became a ghost in his beautiful, high-rise apartment. That sketch. I drew that the night I realized I no longer recognized my own face in the mirror. The room was silent, save for the crackle of the logs. I waited for Julian to look at me with pity. I waited for him to ask why I stayed so long, or why I was so weak. That was the narrative I had beaten myself up with for decades. The foolish girl who gave up her power. But Julian didn't look at me with pity. He looked at the drawing again, tracing the jagged lines of the woman's face with his fingertip. "You know what I see?" he asked quietly. "I see a victim," I whispered. "I don't," Julian said firmly. He turned the book around to face me. "I see resistance. Look at the eyes, Gran. They aren't dead. They're furious. Even when you felt like you were disappearing, your hand was still strong enough to put the truth on paper. You were fighting him, even if it was just in the margins of a sketchbook." I blinked, tears blurring my vision. I leaned forward and really looked at the drawing for the first time in years. He was right. The fear was there, yes, but so was the anger. The lines were heavy and deep. It wasn't the drawing of a defeated person. It was the drawing of someone realizing they needed to break free. I left him 2 weeks after I drew that. I admit it, the memory surfacing with a clarity that shocked me. I packed a single suitcase while he was at an opening. I took a bus to the coast and I never looked back. But I always felt like I had failed. Like I wasn't strong enough to make it in that world. Julian shook his head, a small, sad smile playing on his lips. "Gran, you didn't fail. You survived. You chose yourself over a hollow version of success. In architecture, we talk about structural integrity. Sometimes, you have to tear down a faulty foundation before the whole house collapses. That's what you did. You tore it down so you could build something that would actually stand." His words washed over me like a warm tide. Structural integrity. I had spent so long viewing my retreat from the city as a moment of weakness, as a giving up. But seeing it through my grandson's eyes, I saw it for what it was. A desperate, courageous act of preservation. We sat there for a long time, the heavy silence of the library replaced by a feeling of connection. Eventually, the timer in the kitchen dinged, signaling the bread was done. The mundane sound broke the spell, but the shift in the air remained. We moved to the kitchen. I pulled the bread from the oven, the crust golden and crackling with heat. We made a simple dinner of soup and fresh bread, eating at the small wooden island. The atmosphere was lighter now. "Do you have more?" Julian asked between bites. "Drawings, I mean?" "Boxes of them." I laughed, a sound that felt genuine. "In the attic. I haven't looked at them since I moved into this house." "Tomorrow," he said, tearing a piece of bread. "If the storm clears, we should go up there." I nodded. "Okay, tomorrow." That night, I slept better than I had in years. The wind continued to batter the house, but I didn't feel the need to hide from it. I felt anchored. The next morning, the world was transformed. The storm had left behind a landscape of pristine, blinding white snow. The sky was a piercing blue, the sun reflecting off the drifts with a brilliance that hurt the eyes. After coffee, true to our plan, Julian and I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. It was freezing up there, our breath puffing out in white clouds. We found the trunk I had mentioned. Inside were dozens of canvases, sketches, and charcoal studies from that time in my life. We spent the morning going through them. I told him the stories behind the images, not just the pain but the moments of beauty, too. The way the light hit the city streets at dawn, the smell of turpentine and old coffee, the feeling of charcoal staining my fingertips. I realized that by locking these memories away, I hadn't just hidden the pain. I had hidden my passion. I had hidden the artist. Around noon, Julian suggested we take a walk to the lighthouse point. The snow was deep, but we bundled up in heavy coats and scarves. The air was crisp and cold, filling our lungs with the sharp scent of salt and pine. We walked mostly in silence, the snow crunching under our boots. When we reached the bluff, the view was breathtaking. The gray ocean was churning below, whitecaps crashing against the jagged black rocks. The lighthouse stood stoic and red against the blue sky. We stood there, side by side, looking out at the endless horizon. I used to come to a spot like this, I told him, shouting slightly over the wind. After I left the city, I would scream into the wind because I was so angry at myself for wasting those years. Julian turned to me, his cheeks flushed with the cold. You didn't waste them, Gran. You were gathering material. You were learning what you didn't want so you would know what you did want. He pointed out at the vast, open water. Think about it. If you hadn't left, you wouldn't have met Grandpa. You wouldn't have had Mom. You wouldn't be standing here with me. That difficult chapter wasn't the end of your story. It was just the plot twist that got you to the good part. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the kindness in his eyes, the intelligence, the empathy. And I saw my own daughter in his face, and my late husband. I saw the life that had blossomed because I had walked away from the darkness. You're right, I said, and for the first time, I felt the truth of it settle deep in my bones. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. We walked back to the house as the sun began to dip low in the sky, casting long, purple shadows across the snow. The house looked different to me as we approached it. It didn't look like a fortress anymore. It looked like a home. That evening, after Julian had packed his bag to head back to the university the next day, I went back into the library. I took the charcoal drawing, the one of the screaming woman, and I didn't put it back in the book. Instead, I found a simple wooden frame I had in the closet. I framed the sketch and placed it on the mantelpiece, right next to the photos of my wedding and my grandchildren. It belongs there. It isn't a badge of shame. It is a testament to the moment I decided to survive. It is a portrait of the fire that burned the old life down so the new one could grow. Julian left the next morning. I hugged him tighter than usual, whispering a thank you into his coat. He just squeezed my hand and told me to keep drawing. And I did. I bought a new sketchbook that very afternoon. My hands are stiffer now, and my lines aren't as steady as they were in my 20s, but the joy is there. The release is there. I realized that healing doesn't mean the scar disappears. It means the wound stops dictating your movements. It means you can look at the scar and remember the healing, not just the injury. My grandson didn't save me. I saved myself all those years ago. But he did something just as important. He turned on the light in a dark room and showed me that there were no monsters there, only memories. He taught me that our history, even the jagged parts, is what gives us our shape. So, to anyone listening who is holding on to a heavy box of memories, afraid to open the lid, be gentle with yourself. You are not defined by the moments you fell down or the moments you were made to feel small. You are defined by the moment you stood back up. And sometimes, if you're lucky, someone will come along and remind you just how tall you're standing. Thank you for letting me share this piece of my heart with you. If this story brought a specific memory to mind, or if you've ever had a conversation that changed how you saw your own past, I would be honored if you shared it in the comments. Let's create a space here for healing and understanding. Please, take care of yourselves and remember to like and subscribe for more stories from this old house on the coast. Until next time, keep your heart open and don't be afraid of the wind.